Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly cinematic journey to unpack one of the most profound geopolitical shifts in the ancient world. We'll be looking at how the explosive rise of the Achaemenid Empire, which was essentially the first true global superpower, completely altered the destiny of the Judean people. We're talking about a massive transition from a state of brutal, crushing exile to an era of unprecedented liberation. It's an epic story of destruction, survival, and a total revolution in how empires actually governed. So let's jump right in.
Picture this. We begin our story in the dark, smoldering ashes of Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE. The historical records from this time paint an absolutely staggering picture of devastation. You have to understand this wasn't just a standard military defeat. It was the targeted, deliberate destruction of a culture and its sacred epicenter. By focusing on this exact moment of sheer despair, we set a dramatic stage that's going to help us fully grasp the sheer magnitude of the liberation that would eventually follow.
So that brings us to Chapter 1, the Fall of Jerusalem. To really get why the Persian liberation was such a big deal, we first have to look at the brutal imperialism of Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't just conquer Jerusalem overnight, He escalated his campaigns over a deeply grueling period. In his early sieges, he took hostages, including prominent youths, and eventually exiled up to 3,000 Judeans. But when Jerusalem refused to just roll over and submit, Nebuchadnezzar returned with merciless force. During this final, horrific siege, the Babylonian army completely destroyed the most sacred Judean site, the Temple of Solomon. The historical accounts actually tell us that the Babylonians killed the sons of the Judean king right in front of him and then blinded him, literally making the death of his children the very last thing he ever saw. In total, over 10,000 people were thrown into chains and forced into a brutal, unforgiving march across the desert to Babylon.
Which leads us right into Chapter 2, Exile in Babylon. So violently torn from Zion and planted into the totally alien heart of Babylon, the Judeans had to figure out how to survive. Captives like Daniel used some incredibly unique skills, like dream interpretation, to actually rise to prominence. He didn't just barely survive under King Nebuchadnezzar, he attained a level of influence that was so profound it actually carried over into the next era. He maintained immense authority even after the Babylonian Empire fell to the Persians. His presence at the absolute highest levels of the incoming Achaemenid administration was a total game-changer. Later on, figures like Ezra and Nehemiah would emerge during the Persian era to document the miraculous return to Zion. But well before that return could happen, the ancient world needed a massive shakeup.
And that massive shift is exactly what we see in Chapter 3, Rise of Cyrus the Great.
Suddenly, the entire balance of power in the ancient world was flipped on its head by a profound geopolitical contrast. The last king of Babylon, Nabonidus, made a huge, fatal error. He completely alienated his own people by disrespecting local deities and neglecting the wildly important temple of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon. As you'd expect, this caused some deep, simmering public unrest. Meanwhile, you have this energetic new leader, Cyrus the Great, who brilliantly recognized that ruling through terror was just obsolete. When his army marched toward Babylon, he positioned himself not as a tyrant, but as a protector of local traditions. Because of all that internal unrest caused by Nabonidus, Cyrus was able to march right into the mighty city of Babylon almost entirely without a fight. Seriously, it was a bloodless conquest. He was welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a literal liberator. This takes us straight to Chapter 4, the Cyrus Cylinder. Right after the fall of Babylon, we encounter an artifact etched in clay that completely redefined ancient diplomacy, administration, and human rights as we know them. The Cyrus Cylinder is absolutely foundational to modern civilization. This isn't just your typical run-of-the-mill ancient victory monument bragging about how many enemies a king slaughtered. Instead, it is a revolutionary blueprint for religious freedom and tolerance. By explicitly establishing a state policy of restoring ruined temples and allowing deported peoples to finally go home, Cyrus completely inverted the brutal, terror-based deportation tactics of the Assyrians and the Babylonians.
And the best part, Cyrus actually backed up his words with concrete actions. He specifically allowed the Judeans to return home to Jerusalem. He explicitly ordered the rebuilding of their ruined temples, and get this, he even returned the sacred artifacts that the Babylonians had stolen decades earlier. On top of all that, he abolished forced corvée labor, which was the unpaid, grueling forced labor imposed on the everyday masses. This was an absolute paradigm shift in how an empire treated its subjects.
And that incredible pivot brings us to our final act, Chapter 5, Return to Zion.
all of these policies built into a physical and spiritual restoration of the Judean people that still resonates deeply through history today. Now, think about this for a second. Historical sources written by conquered peoples rarely speak well of their conquerors. That's just human nature. But the Judean texts, specifically the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, present a deeply positive, almost totally unique historical record of the Achaemenid kings. Because of their radical policies of religious tolerance, the Persian kings are documented not as oppressors, but as the actual protectors of religious minorities and the literal rebuilders of the Yahwist faith. It is a stunning historical anomaly.
We can actually see this play out in a series of incredible steps. First, you have Cyrus issuing the decree. Then, the arduous, long journey back to Jerusalem. But here's the truly shocking part. The construction of the Second Temple was actually supported by state funds from the very empire that ruled over them. And this wasn't just a one-time passing favor from Cyrus. Subsequent Persian rulers doubled down on this policy. When local disputes threatened the rebuilding of the temple, King Darius the Great stepped in and fiercely protected the project. Historical records show Darius explicitly ordered that anyone who interfered with the temple's construction would have their own house torn down and they would be executed. The Achaemenid state literally threw its full intimidating weight behind the religious freedom of the Judeans.
By completely rejecting the cruelty of his predecessors, Cyrus the Great didn't just build a successful empire, he ensured the very survival of a people and their deeply held faith. It leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. How did one leader's revolutionary policy of tolerance forever alter the course of world history and the survival of a faith? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.